Hello and welcome to another video and podcast from FantasyFootballScout.co.uk. My name is David and today we're going to have a look at how my team got on in Game Week 6 and what my plans are for double Game Week 7, arguably the most underwhelming double game week of recent memory. And so there's going to be a bit of discussion about Luton and Burnley players this week, but fear not, I'm largely staying away from those two sides for Game Week 7. And of course, have been thrown a number of issues from the so-called physio room of my FPL team with a couple of yellow flags in my midfield, which I know are plaguing other managers as well. So I'm going to talk about what my plans are there. A lot of waiting around this week. Unfortunately, we've got extra midweek action, which of course impacts may impact what happens with my team. So there's lots of considerations to make. And just for to help people understand the context of which I'm recording this on Wednesday morning. So we've had half of the EFL Cup games played, and this is before the Wednesday night one. So if there's any additional updates from that possibly impact my team, then there'll be a couple of videos later in the week which might go through the implications there. But fingers crossed, there's not too many changes related to my team from the Wednesday games. Before we jump into what happened with my team last time and what my plans are, just a few bits of housekeeping. As ever on these videos, I like to look at some of the key stats that are fueling some of my decisions for the next game week, and of course they all come from the Fantasy Football Scout members area. So if you've not sorted out your membership for Game Week 7, make sure you still take advantage of that nice little hefty discount there. And another piece of news which is very exciting for us and we're very proud of. We've been shortlisted for Best in Fantasy Football Editorial at the Football Content Awards once again for the 2023 rendition of those awards. So if you'd like to vote for us in that category, then you can find details on how to do that in the description, and any support that you guys give us is much appreciated. It means a lot to us, and yeah, as I said, we really appreciate it. But let's move on to how my team fared in Game Week 6. Now, last week I was talking about doing a mini wildcard. That is exactly what I did. Not perhaps at the time I wanted to. I ended up having to actually do my moves on a Friday night, which I don't normally like to do in this new world where we quite often get little inklings about who may or may not start on Saturday's games. And of course, with no lunchtime game, we were able to get pieces of information for 3 of those Saturday games. But unfortunately, it was those pesky price changes that kind of forced my hand in the end. I perhaps manifested that because I mentioned on a couple of videos last week that I wasn't all that worried about them this year, and I hadn't been worried about them for some time. I had a lot of money in the bank, but of course one of my moves was to get Salah in, so money in the end became a consideration not on who I brought in, but on the timing of it. So what I did was I moved Gabriel to Botman. That was a nice easy switch, to be honest, and my plan was to do Foden to Salah. Now I could have done that move earlier in the week if it wasn't for a slightly unpredictable increase for Botman. I didn't really see anywhere predicting that he was going to go up in price the day that he did, and that then put me in a scenario of and then I think Alvarez went up again, and it was looking like Jackson might drop. So I was in a situation where if I didn't do Alvarez to Jackson when I did, I wouldn't actually have the funds to do Foden to Salah. Would have been just 0.1 short of being able to do it. So in the end, I thought, okay, I've still got the wild card in play. I'm quite happy with the rest of my team. I'm fairly confident Alvarez is going to start. He was the main sort of like, in inverted commas, starting concern for Saturday. But I felt that looking at the Man City team, team news, I suppose, I was fairly confident Alvarez would play because of who they didn't have available. So made those moves Friday night. Gabriel to Botman, Foden to Salah, Jackson to Alvarez for a -4 with the 2 free transfers thrown in there. And I'm not unhappy with how it went. It could have gone better, but I'm not unhappy either. So I finished Game Week 6 with 75 points, or rather 71 when you remove that -4. And let's focus on those transfers first. Gabriel to Botman was a big win. He got his first ever Newcastle goal, and really pleased with how that came about. It, of course, came from a header, from a set piece, which we kind of talked about last week. Sheffield United were the worst team for conceding chances from set plays and from headers. So I felt that was going to benefit Botman. Now, he didn't get the full 18 points that Trippier did. I know last week I said that Trippier was going to be hard to fit into my team, but I felt Botman wasn't too much of a downgrade there. I still stick by that. 6-point gap between the two players, but roughly 2 million in price. So I think I think I've got what I paid for there in a way that doesn't make me unhappy, because what that allowed me to do was, of course, get Salah. Now, this one I'm a bit more frustrated by because I sold Foden, who got 11 points, and I got Salah, who got 10. I do think Salah's going to outscore Foden over the next 5-6 weeks, though, especially with the fixtures that Liverpool have coming up. And it's worth pointing out that actually Foden only had one shot against Nottingham Forest and ended up in the back of the net. He hasn't really been all that much of a persistent shooter this year, which is one of the reasons why I was moving him on. That had largely contributed to him not really getting as many attacking returns as I'd hoped that he would. And so I kind of feel like it was probably a sound decision, or rather one I'm not unhappy with, even if the outcome wasn't one I was happy with. The chances of him getting one shot and one goal over the next few games, I think, is low. I'm happy to sort of play by the law of averages on that one. As I said, it's cost me 1 point, but I think it's going to set me up for better things moving forward. And conversely, Alvarez, he actually finished the Man City win over Nottingham Forest with more shots than any other player. And of course, if it wasn't for Rodri, with a rather uncharacteristically hot-headed moment where he, lost his head, then I think Alvarez stays on the pitch for longer and probably would have converted those underlying numbers into an attacking return. Of course, Jackson got nothing. Other than another yellow card, so he's now banned. So again, it's not a bad transfer. I felt Alvarez would have outscored Jackson over the next few weeks anyway. If he continues to be the most persistent shooter in a Man City shirt for games, he's going to continue that good run of form, and now at the very least he's going to play one more game than Jackson in the next 2 weeks, I would like to think, injuries notwithstanding. But speaking of injuries, I do have a bit of an ongoing situation which other managers also find themselves in, which is, of course, what to do with MADDISON and SAKA, who now find themselves yellow flagged. So I'll run through my current bus team for the benefit of the podcast listeners. It's Flecken in goal, Stupinan, Botman, and I've put Chilwell back in for now. He was on my bench for Game Week 6. That may change, but yeah, he's there for now. And Burmo, MADDISON with the yellow flag, Diaby, Salah, Saka with the yellow flag, and then Alvarez and Haaland up front with the captaincy on the Norwegian, of course. Then the bench is Turner, Cash, Anderson, and Archer. Now, let's start with these injuries then, because I think they're the main issues that will dictate what I do with my team. I would, in theory, like to roll my transfers again, because going into Game Week 8 or 9, which is when a lot of people are thinking of deploying their wildcard, it would be quite nice to throw another mini wildcard into the mix for me. I'm increasingly coming around to the idea that I can just about leverage my team towards the fixture swing in 8 and 9 with the free transfers rather than having to play the wildcard, allowing me to play it a little bit later, making the gap between my first and my second wildcard a bit smaller so that my team isn't as left hung out to dry without that wildcard for as long as it would be if I played it now, for example, because I do want to make sure I keep playing that second wildcard in the Goldilocks zone, as I call it, between about game 28 to 32, something like that, so that it's ready to leverage the chip season. So that's kind of like what I want to do with my team, and 2 free transfers at the nearest opportunity to help work my way into that fixture swing in Game Week 8 and 9, etc. would be nice. That would be nice. However, I do have the issue of these injuries and what to do with them, because, of course, they're for big players, they're for players who are expensive as well, and I don't really have similar options, alternative to them on my bench. I've got, of course, Cash and Anderson who could come in, but can they really cover a MADDISON and a Saka absence for a game week? I don't think they can. I think that's going to leave my team a few points short in a way that could help me lose some additional ground. I should probably just mention what my current position is. Those who are watching on YouTube will be able to see what my current rank is, but if you're listening on the podcast, I'm down to 465k. It was absolutely bonkers week, I think, Game Week 6, because to get 71 points and still drop by about 200k places, what a world we live in when that's what's happening. I'm not too upset with that. But I certainly want to make sure I can arrest that slide. It's now 3 red arrows in a row, which I suppose sort of comes with the territory from having a fairly strong start. After Game Week 3, I was 19k. Game Week 4, I was down to 82. Game Week 5, down to 263. And now for Game Week 6, or rather going into Game Week 7, I'm at 465k. If you'd offered me that after 6 games at the start of the season, I absolutely would have taken it, because it's not a bad place to be in, because I know there's a lot of managers sort of outside the top million, for example, so I don't want to be ungrateful, but it's just the sort of relativity of having started well that's put me where I am. I do definitely want to arrest that slide, and that's why I'm thinking about alternative options for these 2 midfielders, MADDISON and Saka. So in best case scenario, I think that they both survive this yellow flag, and we get confirmation later in the week that they're going to be okay for game week 6. And if that's what happens, then great. I think I probably will roll my transfer. And so I'm going to talk through the different scenarios that I've got. And sort of talk about what my options are depending on what happens. It's sort of a flow chart. I haven't drawn one, but I've got one in my mind of what I'm going to do. So let's say they're both fit. Then I would like to roll the transfer, because then my only decision becomes Cash versus Chilwell. Who do I start? Now, the only reason why that's a bit of an issue is, of course, that I've got a Stupinan as well. Do I want to play Cash and Stupinan? I think... In a normal world, no, I don't want to. It's difficult sometimes to play two defenders from the same fixture playing each other if you don't think it's going to be a 0-0, because I don't think this is going to be a 0-0. I think this is going to be a fairly high-scoring game. Now, however, I think that these two guys are guys who are very exciting attacking players, and so and certainly both of them feel more likely to start than Chilwell. We'll come on to Chilwell in just a second, because it's an annoying place to be. I think he can do well if he starts, but that's the issue. So let's just start with Cash then. Cash has been a very, to be honest, I'm finding myself talking myself into starting Cash now. He's been a very persistent shooter in in the last 4 game weeks. In the last 4 matches, I should say, 10 shots for him in the box. That's more than any other defender by actually some distance. And there's only 6 players in the entire Premier League who've had more shots in the box than him. Shots on target, he's had 6. Again, it's about 6 or 7 players in the Premier League who've had more shots on target than him. That's pretty good, bearing in mind he is an FPL defender, and he's also top of the charts for most shots on target for FPL defenders as well. So I'm now sat here wondering why he's on my bench, especially when he's more likely to play than Chilwell. Let's talk about Chilwell now, because if Chilwell were to play against Fulham, I think he's got a very strong chance of a big haul, because he does get involved at the right areas of the pitch really well. Chelsea's defence has actually started the season fairly well. It's sort of gone under the radar because everyone's kind of focused on the fact that they're not scoring goals. They have been keeping clean sheets mostly when we want them to or expect them to. We're again frustrated because Chilwell's not been able to capitalise on that, or Gusto's been sent off, for example. Things like that have sort of happened, and it's sort of distracted from the fact that Chelsea, and we'll look at some numbers for it in a minute, they're not that obliging. Fulham, on the other hand, XG has been very low so far this season, and so I do think Chelsea have a good chance of a clean sheet in this one. It's a must-win game for them, not only because they've not started well offensively, also Fulham very much one of their closest rivals as well, so they do have to win this. But the big if does stem from the fact that Chilwell hasn't started the last 2, and then 3 games ago when he did start was brought off before the 60th minute. A couple of bookings thrown in there, and it's really just been a frustrating time. And he's getting sold by a lot of people, especially in a world where if there's a bit of money in the bank, you can get to Trippier. Now I sit here not really able to get to Trippier, which is a bit annoying for now. I could, for example, do Chilwell to Dan Burn or Fabian Schär perhaps, because I do think double Newcastle defence against Burnley, that would work as well. But as I said, this is sort of reliant on what happens with those midfielders. So those are sort of my dilemmas if I'm able to run my transfer. But if I'm not able to, let's have a look at what some of my options are. And because there's 2 guys with yellow flags, there's a number of variables here. So we could have maybe Maddison and Saka both miss game week 7. We could maybe have Maddison's fine, but Saka's not, or vice versa. So we do have some quotes at the moment that give us a general indication that maybe things are going to be okay with Maddison. What we got from Postecoglou after the Game Week 6 result, the 2-2 draw with Arsenal. He said, I'm not sure with Brennan Johnson, who's also flagged now. It seems like he felt something. I think it's hamstring. We'll assess that. Maddison and Son weren't 100% going into the game, but they got through it, which suggests that it's nothing serious. So the official line from Postecoglou is that it's nothing serious, but when it comes to FPL flags, there is clearly some element of doubt here, in the sense that he's suggesting it's not serious. He's obviously confirming that Maddison's not 100%, so it's just something to stay on top of. I'm less worried about Maddison than I am Saka. which is a bit annoying because Saka has the better fixture, but it is still just something to be aware of. The Saka one then, he was asked, Arteta, by the press about Saka after the game, and he said he was limping quite badly after the match. We had to get him off the field, which is never a good sign. He hasn't been able to participate in the most recent training session. And then the follow-up question from the journalist, doing a great job here, in a world where people didn't even ask Pochettino about Chilwell last week. Some really focused questions here from the journalist from Football.London. Could he be out versus Bournemouth? And Arteta said it's a possibility, yes. Now, both of those are still only good enough for a yellow flag rather than a flag of any other kind of colour. But this one in particular makes me a little bit concerned about what to do with Saka, because he's an important player in our teams. He's expensive, so it means if he's not going to play, you're sort of missing out on some money that you could leverage in a different direction. So it's a bit frustrating. But let's have a look at some of the fixtures to work out what my options are, because as I said, I have to plan for a world where I maybe have to sell one of these two depending on how long they're out for. If it's Saka out for one game, maybe I can push through by bringing in cash and perhaps maybe doing Chilwell to a Newcastle defender, or maybe even let's just see what Pochettino says. There's fingers crossed that a journalist asked about Chilwell on the press conferences we've got coming up, or we got this midweek game as well. Fingers crossed we get some more information there, and then maybe I can feel more confident either selling or holding him if it's Saka just for one game. But if I do need to get myself a replacement, well, let's just have a quick look at what Spurs and Arsenal's fixtures are. In terms of do I sell Saka, for example? Bournemouth away obviously is a nice fixture. At home against Man City, obviously I'd be less interested in having Saka for that one. So if he does miss one game, it's possibly sellable. Chelsea game week 9 and Newcastle game week 11. But unfortunately, you've got Sheffield United at home game week 10 and Burnley at home game week 12. So he'd have to be injured for a number of weeks for me to seriously consider selling him. But there are a number of trickier fixtures in there that could push me in that direction. We'll have a look at some potential replacements in a second. Spurs, if Maddison just misses the one game, not bothered at all, because Luton away game week 8, Fulham at home game week 9, Palace away game week 10. Those three in particular look very nice. Chelsea at home game week 11. I know that people say that's not a difficult fixture right now. It's not a difficult fixture for defensive purposes. However, we'll have a look at some numbers in a second. Chelsea's defence isn't actually performing that poorly, and therefore in that particular game, maybe that's a hard one. But broadly, those fixtures are still good for Spurs. Of course, you've got Wolves away game week 12 as well. So I would really need Maddison and or Son to be out for an extended period if I was seriously consider spending some transfers in midfield. So let's have a look then at some possible replacements if I have to do that, because as I said, I do want to be able to put myself in a position where if we get the news that we get confirmation of one way or the other on some of these injuries, it's nice to know which way to go. I'll start off by having a look at the teams that have good fixtures in sort of a world where there's decent midfielders. And the only two that I can really justify who I can get to are probably Newcastle and West Ham, in the sense that Aston Villa are obviously top of the season ticker right now, but I already have Diaby. Burnley and Luton, I'm not really interested in their players long term. I'm certainly not going to replace Maddison or Saka with either of their midfield options, to be honest. Spurs are also up there, but I can't really get to Son right now. I'd like to at some point. I think that he's going to be worth owning, and if you want some more information on sort of what to do with him, whether you do or don't own him, I've done a video earlier this week about working out when he's likely to perform at his best. It's a little bit more nuanced than if they have good fixtures, he's going to be a good option. It's a bit more nuanced than that. Liverpool also up there, but I've got Salah. And so then just coming down the season ticker for attacking potential between game week 7 and 12, it's Newcastle and West Ham who offer some midfield options who I don't currently have. And so I'll start off at first talking about Anthony Gordon, who I think is the most likely player I would bring in if I had to make a midfield transfer, because he's looking really nice. I've had my eye on him basically all season, and I've kind of just been hoping that something happens that makes me think, okay, I can invest in him, because I don't think people are going to go anywhere near him. I think the fact that he arguably wasn't as productive in terms of attacking returns at Everton as he could have been, despite looking quite bright, I think people will sort of read into that. I think the fact that he hasn't necessarily always played as many minutes so far this season for Newcastle will also factor in. 67 minutes in game week 1, 55 in game week 2, 71 in game week 3. However, this injury to Harvey Barnes does throw fantasy managers a bit of an opportunity with Gordon. He's in just 4.1% of teams. He's played 90 minutes in 2 of the last 3. He's played 78 minutes against Sheffield United, got a goal and assist, and there is now his main positional rival is going to be out for what looks like a number of months. And so I know there's Champions League rotation kind of involved in there as well, but, either side of that game against Milan, he played 90 minutes against Brentford, 78 against Sheffield United. So I feel like there's still possibilities he's going to play a lot of minutes here. And the numbers that he's recording are quite impressive, both from a creative perspective and goal threat as well. So in the last 4 matches, Gordon has created 3 big chances. Only Salah has fashioned more big chances than Gordon. He's not necessarily a volume creator. He has only created 6 chances, but the percentage of those that have been big is quite high when you consider, for example, that Pedro Neto has created double the number of chances as Neto has created double the number of chances as Gordon, but has actually still only created the same number of big chances as him, for example. So when he does have the opportunity to create, he's putting the ball into areas where it's creating big chances for his teammates. And I quite like that, because when you balance that with what he is offering in terms of actual goal threat, whilst there haven't been all that many shots in the box, it's just 4 for him. He's had 6 on target, which puts him behind about 6 or 7 players for shots on target in the Premier League over the last 4 matches. Odegaard, Eze, Wilson, Fernandes, Maddison, Ferguson and Haaland are the ones that are ahead of him. Now, I would love to have Callum Wilson, who clearly is the biggest goal threat at Newcastle, but you just look at those minutes, 224. I've said already a number of times, he is putting up numbers that make it look like he's playing 90 minutes, and maybe he can mitigate against that by just being very productive in the minutes when he's on the pitch. I think right now I just don't have the openings in the forward area, and I might do in midfield. So Gordon feels like the way to go if I'm going to go into that Newcastle midfield. The other thing is, with these numbers, they are of course impacted over the last 4 by the fact that he hasn't completed 2 of the last 4, but as I said, I do think that with Harvey Barnes out, he's more likely to. And just in 4.1% of teams, I do quite like him for that run. Now, the other team to, of course, consider is West Ham. They've got Sheffield United next, who, of course, famously lost to Gordon's Newcastle by a scoreline of 8-0 in game week 6. And so, we do think that West Ham are going to have a good week here. Bowen and Ward-Prowse are the ones that are kind of on my mind. I'm a little bit undecided between the 2 of them because, of course, against Sheffield United, Ward-Prowse's involvement with the set pieces, he could be this week's Trippier, for example. I think Bowen is more likely to provide threat from open play. There is a really, really interesting article on Fantasy Football Scout right now. Some of it is sort of limited to members-only content because there's a lot of analysis of some tables and some maps and some numbers in there that Mark has written for us. It's really, really good. If you want to have a bit of a case study into which is better, Bowen or Ward-Prowse, do go and read that. I'll make sure that the link is in the description as well if you'd like to head to the site. And so I've got some inkling that I might want to have them at some point, especially when the fixtures swing for West Ham, which is largely from game week 10. We've got Everton at home then, they've got Forest at home game week 12, and they are even higher on the season ticker for attacking potential for that particular run. So I think I will have a West Ham midfielder at some point. Do I want to go for it now? Well, I do think there would be some good short-term returns, but I think I do want to get the Newcastle game in game week 8 and the Aston Villa match in game week 9, that one's at Villa Park, out of the way. West Ham have been very good this season. They performed above expectations, even of their own fans. When my dad saw the fixture list at the start of the season, he just groaned and goes, West Ham always have a really hard start to the season for the fixtures, but they really have sort of made a mockery of that with the way that they've started the season in many ways. But the Newcastle and Aston Villa defence I quite like this season, and therefore I sort of would be sort of tempering my expectations for what I can expect from a West Ham attacker in those games. Comparing that with Newcastle over the next 3, less so. Burnley at home, I think, is a great fixture for them. Burnley have been very obliging in defence so far this season because they keep trying to play the ball out from the back and it's not working. West Ham away in game week 8 is actually a really good fixture. In the last 4 matches, only one team has actually conceded expected goals at a faster rate than the Hammers. So while they are doing a good job of scoring goals, they are also doing a good job of conceding them as well. So I think there's great opportunities for Newcastle in the next two, whereas I can't say the same about the Newcastle defence offering chances to the West Ham one, if that makes sense. So over the next two, I do prefer a Newcastle guy if I can get one, which does give a bit of an advantage to Gordon if I need to make a switch. So that's the sort of situation that I'm looking at there. Now, a couple of other things that are in my team. That I appreciate that this is a little bit of an adventure in all of the different options I could go with my team this week. Of course, it being midweek, there's lots of things I am considering. There is a couple of sort of question marks around Brentford right now, and I just wanted to touch on that in terms of what my thoughts are, because of course I've been a strong proponent of the Fleck Republic all season. I've had a couple of comments from people saying it's become a failed state. Well, you might be right, unfortunately, and one of my decisions had been to work out whether or not I would start Flecken or Turner, because of course they are facing each other this week. And unfortunately, what we have seen in the last couple of matches, in the last match, is that it's possible that Brentford are very much going to miss Rico Henry at left back, and he's going to be out for basically the whole season. So they need to find themselves a solution here. Going into game week 6, Brentford were in the top 5 teams in the first 5 game weeks for fewest big chances conceded. However, they have very much dropped out of that completely, because they conceded a crazy number of them against Everton, of all teams. Now, the current 6 teams for best or fewest big chances conceded in the last 4 matches: Newcastle with 3, then it's Liverpool and Chelsea with 4, Arsenal, Palace and Spurs with 6. And so looking at those defences, I think is going to be quite wise over the next few weeks, I think. But Brentford all of a sudden have dropped off the radar completely. Now, they haven't done so much as to fall into the bad books of defending the top 6 or the worst 6 teams for rate of minutes per expected goals conceded over the last 4 matches. It's Sheffield United. This is from worst, not to best, but from worst to 6th worst. Sheffield United, then West Ham, as already mentioned, Bournemouth, Wolves, Fulham, and then Forest, which means I'm obviously happy to give them Burmo another week. And it was in the end, it was this particular stat that made me think, okay, look, I probably will continue to have some faith in Flecken, because over the last 4, whilst Brentford have dropped out of the top 6, they haven't dropped into the bottom 6, whereas Nottingham Forest have. Admittedly, they played Man City, but Brentford have done a good job of creating XG so far this season. So, in theory, I do think Flecken will face fewer chances. And so I just have to go off that probability and start him. But I am just a little bit concerned about what it means going forward for Brentford, because some really concerning numbers from their most recent game. So what I did, using the members area, went in and had a look at Brentford's defence from game weeks 1 to 5 with the comparison tool and ticked show averages per match, and then compared that with game week 6, where they, of course, lost 3-1 at home to Everton. And yeah, the fact that it's Everton as well, I think is makes it even more alarming, because they hadn't really hit a barn door for much of the season and then scored 3 in one game. Goal attempts conceded per match for Brentford across the first 5 matches, who they were against some good teams there. Just 12.8 per match. Against Everton, they conceded 18 shots in front of their own fans. In the box, it went from 8.2 per game across the first 5 to 12 against Everton. In terms of goal attempts on target conceded, for Brentford, it went from 4 to 6. And you can see that there is definitely some work they need to do on that left-hand side where they've lost Rico Henry, because in the first 5 matches, Brentford conceded 9.2 crosses from the left-hand side, and they conceded 9.6 from the right-hand side. So showing there that the left-hand side was a little bit more competent in stopping those crosses than the right. However, we saw a big jump against Everton. They conceded 14 crosses from the left, so that's roughly 5 more than they'd been used to per game before that point. Interestingly enough, they only conceded 6 from the right-hand side, which, interesting to see if that continues. But effectively, it was clear that the left had a slight edge over the first 5 matches for defensive solidity. However, against Everton, it was a real weakness for them, where they conceded a lot of crosses from that area. So there is a gap that needs plugging at Brentford. Whether or not that's something that they can sort things out and make some improvements on, that's what I'm going to be keeping an eye on. I'm not necessarily suggesting that I'm going to be making a goalkeeper transfer anytime soon, but I have to stay on top of some of these things, to be honest. And because I've had a number of questions in the last couple of weeks about where I'm at with Flecken, I thought it would be a good idea to sort of just address those concerns. And I'll just jump back to the fixtures to see if there is a stopping off point for them. Well, the Man United game in game week 8, is not a nice fixture for Brentford, especially, defensively, especially if they're going to still have some issues moving forward. Nottingham Forest do actually play Crystal Palace then, so if Turner's still got the number 1 jersey, I could maybe go there. Thing about Brentford, though, is they do host Burnley in game week 9, and I think I would like to give Flecken up until at least then. Funnily enough, game week 10, when Brentford go to Chelsea, which hopefully, depends who you support. Hopefully for Chelsea fans, that's when they've sorted out some of their their issues in front of goal. Maybe that's a typical fixture for Brentford come that point. When we get to that point, that is when West Ham's fixtures really kick in as being when I perhaps maybe want Areola, Everton at home game week 10, Forest at home game week 12. So that's potentially on my horizon as well. And I haven't ruled out playing the wild card around game week 9 or 10, so maybe that's when Flecken has to go. But yeah, that's kind of the situation I'm looking at for my team for game week 7. They're the main issues. So yeah, just to sort of summarise, hopefully I don't have to make any transfers in midfield. If I do, it's a case of hopefully being able to maybe roll the transfer, starting Estupiñán in cash and hoping for attacking returns and benching Chilwell, perhaps selling him on another week. If I don't have to make any transfers in midfield, I'm not going to rule out maybe bringing in a second Newcastle defender because their fixtures certainly look good and there's a lot of attacking potential in their defence. If I have to sell one of my midfielders, I think Anthony Gordon is top of my shopping list. It's a possibility a West Ham player could feature in my transfers as well, but I'm hoping that those midfielders are going to survive the yellow flags going into game week 7. Now, I appreciate I barely talked about Luton and Burnley there. If you want my thoughts on Luton and Burnley, I thought rather than sort of repeat them here, did talk about them at great length in this week's episode of General's Orders, which was out on Tuesday on YouTube. It was out on Wednesday morning on the podcast platforms. So do go and check that out if you want some more thoughts on those two particular teams. And what opinion I gave there largely summarises why they're not really in my plans for game week 7. So I do apologise on that front if you've caught the Luton and Burnley bug for this week. But yeah, unfortunately, it's not for me. Last pieces of housekeeping before I let you all head off with the rest of your day. Much of what I've shown you here is all Fantasy Football Scout members area stuff. If you want access to it in your own time rather than when you're listening to me, sign up for your membership and save 30% on those preseason prices still. And of course, we would absolutely love it if you would be happy to vote for us as the best in fantasy football editorial with the Football Content Awards 2023. There's details on how to do that in the description. Now, with that, I will leave you fine folks for the rest of your tinkering, and I will see you next time.